and welcome to the ALN Thursday at 4. I am Nick Kanoki, the Director of Technology for the Asset Leadership Network, and I'm really thankful for you all being here on this November 12th, 2020. One note before we get underway, if you have any questions or comments, we would love to hear from you, so please write them in the chat or the Q&A function of this Zoom webinar, and we will try to answer them. And now, without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Mike Bordenero, Director of Communications for the Asset Leadership Network.
Thank you very much, Nick, and welcome to everyone. Today, I'm very happy to be talking with Ed Safdie. Ed was with is currently with Grant Thornton for about 2 years now. Prior to Grant Thornton, he has 35 years with the U.S. federal government. And his last time was an extended assignment as chief engineer for the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. And what we're going to be talking with Ed today about is a healthcare sector asset leadership success structure. And that comes from a series of documents that I'm going to just touch on briefly so that people have a background. Let me share my screen here. It starts with the 2019 National Asset Leadership Strategy that Grant Thornton was pivotal in helping us prepare. And we have shared this with Congress. And this document is available at the Asset Leadership website under content. And the taxonomy was a main thing that was established, but there's much more information in this. And in 2020, it was determined that it would be good to establish a sector asset leadership success structures so that we could take the NALS overview, the National Asset Leadership Strategy overview, and start applying it to specific sectors. And I want to very quickly go through this just to show that there was some background, and then there's guidelines. And I'm not going to go into anything, but it was well discussed and organized. Here are the sectors that are being addressed. And today we're going to be talking about the healthcare asset management. And what we did was establish a series of questions that can guide the leaders of different sectors to start thinking in terms of a strategy for their sectors. And Ed has led a team of highly qualified individuals, and we want to expand that team, but Ed has created a first draft. And Ed, if you want to talk a little bit about this first draft of this healthcare infrastructure sector asset leadership success structure, that would be fine. And I'm just going to very quickly scroll down this. We're not going to use this like a presentation on this document. I'm just showing this now so that people understand that it has been addressed and moved through. I'm sure, Ed, if you want to come back to anything specific, we can. But just wanted to give people an overview of what has been done. So I'm going to stop sharing, and this Thursday at ALN Thursday at 4 is supposed to be discussion. So hi, Ed, let's start discussing.
Will do. And you know what, Mike, actually, if you don't mind, I'd love to leave the document up there, and we're going to scroll through it, but I want to open it up for discussion as we do that. So
well, before we do that, can we just talk overview and just keep this like a discussion and just kind of have your input on a little bit of the history? And we like to start with, how did you get involved at this point? You've been obviously involved in asset management for 35 years at the federal government, but how did you get involved in asset management at this level right now?
I was asked to start contributing to the ALN when I joined Grant Thornton about 18 months ago. We're working on 2 years. It's been a pleasure. This year, we started developing the SALs that Mike described. And I'd like all of you to know that we've worked really hard with about 3 or 4 sessions with 4 or 5 people developing those 22 questions. And before we even show the document and scroll through it, I want you to know a couple of things. This is just a draft. It's just the beginning. In fact, the SALs that we created for healthcare is the first of many sector SALs that we hope to create. And taking that one step further, we had several internal discussions about the scope of that first SALs. And I advocated doing it for the actual physical infrastructure, or for those that what we who come from the federal government call real property. An excellent point was made in our many discussions that we cannot really separate the provision of safe and efficacious healthcare from the performance of the real property or the personal property, namely the equipment. They go together. They both have to function. Those of you who attended our kickoff meeting last month know that there's a huge success story at University Health where they have developed ISO 55000 principles for personal property or equipment. We would love to see that happen in the asset world for healthcare infrastructure. One of the things that you'll see about the scope of the research we did for this document, there are over 6,000 hospitals in the nation. The VA itself has 172 medical centers that comprise over 150 million square feet. There are over 5,000 buildings, and the average age, that's the average age of those buildings, is 60. So one can figure out for oneself that there's likely to be a backlog of deficiencies that need to be addressed.
But let's not get into that level of detail, Ed. As the chief engineer at the Department of Veterans Affairs, you know very much about the operational side of things. But let's emphasize that this is that high-level national asset leadership strategy down to the sector asset leadership success structure. So we're trying to figure out a structure that will help not just the VA, but the entire national healthcare system, so that when we hit another pandemic and there's need for PPE in the Northeast, then all hospitals throughout the rest of the country can know that they can send things there. And it's not just internal through one organization or another. We're talking about as a national approach.
Absolutely. I was only providing metrics to give everybody a picture of how big this is and how much good we can do. And it just so happens, Mike is right, it just so happens that I know those numbers, and it provides a picture of the scope, the utter magnitude of the asset for the nation for those 6,000 plus hospitals, which doesn't even include clinics, psychiatric institutions, long-term care institutions, and clinics across the nation. There are thousands and thousands of those, so much is at stake. And we didn't know how this would work when we developed those 22 questions. It was actually enlightening when we created the draft, and I asked several people to edit it in a short time frame. So a quick pause just to thank Jim, Mike, and Jack Kelly and Art Curlin from University Health, and anyone else who contributed to editing the document, because excellent points were made. And there are a couple, if we have time, there are a couple I'd like to go through if we can quickly scroll through the paper. But we answered those 22 questions, and it's informative because it shows just how much needs to be done to create a SALS and to implement the SALS. We can't do it alone. The ALN can help catalyze this, create documents, but as I said at the very beginning when I started speaking, we need your help. We would love for you out there who made time to join us today to look at the document and provide your comments and feedback. We would like it to be as tight as it can be when we present it further. Is there, I'm going to pause for a moment there, Mike, and ask you if there's anything you'd like to add.
Well, thank you. You had said two things that I want to pursue a little further. You said that the university health system has been certified for their personal property, but they're also expanding into their real property. So they're taking the knowledge that they developed by getting personal property certification and sharing that with their real property. And when we were looking at these sectors, we were looking at the entire sector. And because of your specific understanding of the healthcare industry and, you know, being chief engineer at the VA, you got into operational thinking very quickly and wanted to focus on infrastructure. And both Jim and I tried to talk with you about doing this for the entire industry, all healthcare, but you had some very good points about focusing on infrastructure for starters. We want to explain some of those points?
If one looks at the American Society of Civil Engineering status of the infrastructure across the nation, we get a D+ in the United States.
For healthcare?
No, I'm coming to that.
For the entire United States?
Yes.
Okay.
It's a D+. Medical centers, especially those that are Han-style campuses with 90, 200, 300 acres and multiple buildings.
What's a Han style?
Like a college campus. Lots of buildings, grass, walkways.
Does
roads.
Han stand for something?
It's just a name, H-A-H-N.
Okay.
They are little cities.
Mm-hmm.
They are little cities. Whether you're talking about, let's say, Stanford University or UCSF or University of South Florida, they're like little cities. They are a microcosm of the overall infrastructure in the nation. They have electrical distribution, potable water, roads, all the things that we want and need, and then some. They have specific utility systems that are absolutely essential for the provision of safe healthcare. And that's why I advocated for concentrating on the infrastructure as a piece. For those of us that are very familiar with A55K, we know that leadership can pick pieces or facets of a total asset category to try to begin and implement 55,000 principles and obtain certification. In the case of infrastructure, there are so many pieces and it is so complex in its own right that I advocated for looking at the physical infrastructure separately from the equipment. But please know the point that my colleagues made earlier and today is that they are inseparable from the equipment. We need both. But working in medical centers for almost the 4 decades, for those of you who have been out there in facilities management, whether it's a medical center or anywhere else, you know how hard it is to get sustainment funding so to speak, to keep the trains running on time. It is a constant battle. And one of the internal discussions that we had, which was robust, was a notion that I advanced as to whether the team agreed that the simple shortage of funding for sustainment, for capital replenishment, was the root cause of the problem in asset management for the infrastructure. And I came to the conclusion that I was wrong. It's not just that, it's the bigger picture of asset management. And the implementation of 55K does something that I long to see, which is to force the issue of facing all the issues that arise across the life cycle of a real property asset. Specifically, problems that occur early in the cycle in requirements, design, delivery, acquisition, even activation. If they're not well attended, problems will arise in operations and maintenance. And that's where we get left holding the bag. And that is why I wanted to concentrate on the physical infrastructure, why and how ISO 55000 principles can address that problem if we implement it.
You used a word that I thought was very interesting. You said you longed for.
Yes.
And because I've talked with you in the past, I know that that means two things, that you have a strong desire and that you've had the strong desire for a long time.
Yes. And in the paper, in the first draft SALs, you'll see one of the questions, loosely worded, is phrased something like, what obstacles might we face in trying to implement 55K? And some of the ones I mentioned are political challenges and cultural challenges. There tend to be pockets of power, real or perceived, and folks have their turf and they may not want to let go of the turf. I think that Art Kurland could say a lot more about that than I can, because he's actually implemented it, dealing with those kinds of issues. Some of us will face big ones, some of us will face lesser ones, but those are the challenges that have to be had. And in my career, we tried to address them, but we couldn't even make it to third base. And I would like to see that happen.
So you then are similar to Jack Kelly, who is one of our senior fellows and board members, who says he wishes he had this document when he was at the Office of Management and Budget years ago. So are you in that same camp?
Oh, absolutely. It's both documents, though, Mike. I think the baseline, the foundation of the NALs last year, coupled with the improvements that we're working on as we speak for this year, and the SALs in sectors, provides color, fidelity, specificity. We're coming to the table with more details of what we're up against and breaking it down into pieces so they can be understood and attacked.
So you said culture, and I was having a conversation with Marlene Milimechi, one of our senior fellows yesterday, and she said that executives in the federal government get bonuses based on the dollar amounts under them and the number of people that are under them. So if that's actually the case, then the culture is not to save and not to reduce the number of staff. So is that type of culture change part of what you think is necessary?
The answer to that is very complex, and it's not a yes or a no. Let's just say that the ratings for senior executives in federal service is not necessarily even. It's not necessarily even. And by the way, different agencies do it slightly different ways. So there are manifold feeders into how someone is rated. But succinctly put, if the agency in federal service happens to be a cabinet level agency, then there's going to be an outsized influence of political thinking, which unfortunately tends to be shorter term, and the phrase kick the can down the road comes to mind, than the long-term solutions for asset management. It takes a tremendous commitment for people to have trust that they're going to be heard and they will have their say as decisions are made. And again, Art Kurland could probably offer a lot about that, because I haven't been through that process.
Well, part of what we are doing with these sector asset leadership success structures is to include them in a document that we're going to be sending to the transition team when it's acknowledged. And do you think that the incoming administration may be of a mindset to be looking at the long-term thinking that you say is necessary to have success in these areas?
I certainly hope so. Many of us have heard talk for over a year, 2 years, even 3, about a giant infrastructure package for the nation. May I pose this question? What could be more important than taking care of the infrastructure for where we deliver healthcare? This is where people who are most vulnerable, most infirmed are going for help. We don't need any more nosocomial infections that occur as a result of treatment in a medical center. We want to minimize that. We don't want to see Legionnaire's disease. We don't want to see sudden stoppages of electricity because the distribution systems are fragile, old, and overtaxed because of the new demands on electricity supply for IT systems. And by the way, that's going to get worse. And some of that I touched upon in the paper. There's a lot more coming. So if there's going to be an infrastructure package for the nation, then I would like to see healthcare speak up loud and clear to get a decent component of that funding. And let's deal with our problems.
Excellent. I think that's a great lead in to going to the document, because part of what we want this discussion to do is help inform people in other sectors how they can more easily approach this and maybe not be so afraid of it, seeing how somebody else already has taken the first step, and it was being the guinea pig. So thank you for being a research rodent for us. Well, I'll start up at the top, and you let me know.
Thank you, Mike. The introduction part, Mike and I have covered fairly well through our discussion. You know why I advocated for looking at the physical infrastructure, and that is the sector. It is the healthcare sector that's being reviewed, but it's the physical infrastructure, buildings, structures like warehouses, sheds, and the utility support systems that support it, excluding land, which technically is real property. The responsibility of the sector is quite clear. We need to deliver safe healthcare to those who need it and who qualify for it. We talked about the scale of the sector. Just a couple of factoids at the bottom there. In the nation, annually, 36 million admissions, 1.1 trillion in revenue, 924,000 staffed beds. And then I mentioned about by itself, just giving an example. This is not about VA, it's about the entire nation, but it is a large institution, the largest that we have, if not in the world, for healthcare provision. So it provides a picture. And don't forget, federal government has more than that. They have the Defense Health Agency, Indian Health Services, and laboratories with HHS. What's the objective? Simply put, our job is to deliver safe, timely, and efficacious healthcare to the nation. That is the national objective. How well are they achieving the results? That's a great question. I think we need a discussion and more input from those of you that are out there who might be working in healthcare. We need to know, what do you think? How well do you think the sector is doing? And what are the problems facing the sector? A few. Aged infrastructure. Is the infrastructure capable of providing the capacity and quality of utility that we need? Things have changed so much, and for those of us who have worked on the front line in O&M, operations and maintenance, you know how much more complex maintaining those systems is today than previously. Sustainment and capital funding are a huge challenge in the federal government. It's different outside the federal government, but I wonder how much easier it might be. We'd love to get feedback from you on that. And rapid technological changes. What we have seen is that systems have become much more complex through the advent of microprocessors and computers. So if some of you know some of these terms, the building control systems from Johnson Controls and Metasys, they've become so complex that it's hard to have your internal staff maintain those systems. So then it becomes harder to recruit someone who can take care of them.
I'd like to focus here for just a second on these pressing problems facing the sector, because I think this is a reach out to all the other sectors. They can use this almost verbatim. Just change healthcare to water and wastewater. I mean, what we're trying to do is show that there are similar problems across all of our assets. And if we have a national approach, we are likely to yield better results than if we just approach each of these individually. So this is a real appeal to the other sectors to participate and get in here and add some of the problems and some of these, some of their individual strengths. But okay, you were talking about the strengths of the sector.
Oh, Mike, I want to underscore the point you just made. It's really hard to make progress if it's a lone wolf speaking. And we don't want to be a lone wolf. We want to get asset leadership together to be heard, So, Mike, that is an excellent point. I know I've said it twice already. I'm going to say it again. This is the very first draft. So we welcome your input. By no means do we think that the list is complete. We'd love to see what all of you think. I do want to say that in my work, both in the government and outside, the strengths of the sector are the people that hold it together. There's a lot of dedication out there. Laws and regulations. Excellent point. The Joint Commission is paramount. While it's not a law and it's not technically a regulation, it is a voluntary compliance issue without which, if we don't achieve accreditation at our facility, will create huge financial and other problems because billing for Medicare and even third-party insurers will become problematic. And I'm not going to sit here and read all those regulations and statutes. Suffice to say that the statutes beginning at about a third of the way down of that list apply to federal facilities, but that does not mean that they don't show good practice that could be adopted. Absolutely, and the ones that you see in italics there touch upon, they have some form of overlap to the healthcare sector, and we can keep moving. What categories? There they are. I've mentioned most of them before, and down below on the next page, we start talking about some of the specific utility systems. Hospitals are among the most complex facilities that can be. It takes a lot to manage them and keep them safe. And this is interesting. Who controls the assets? And the next moniker is, who are the stakeholders? Well, Jack pointed out that we may want to massage that question and make it clearer because we'd rather not see overlap there. So we may be working on that and improving that question to provide more granularity. And Mike pointed out the ISO 4.2 section there for social responsibility. That's an excellent point. How will stakeholders be included? That is an excellent question. And I put that note there that says this requires more discussion. We would love to hear from you about how stakeholders can and should be included. And this is the lesson I learned about the objectives for asset management versus the objectives for the sector, for the national objectives. These are just example of objectives for the asset management activities in the sector. Again, by no means do we think this is totally complete, but it's quite a list just to begin with.
Yeah.
And the desired end state is very important. We want to be able to deliver the healthcare objectives in a consistent and reliable manner. Put succinctly, that's what we want. And I'm going to just say one last thing about ISO 55K, because I think after that, it's an excellent time to go to Art's question. How will ISO 55K support this? I'd like to say two things about that. One, governance. Overall organizational governance, whatever your organization is, for roles, responsibilities, and commensurate authority for the entire life cycle of a real property or infrastructure asset, beginning with building requirements all the way through design, construction, delivery, acquisition, activation, all the way to disposal. It has to be clear who does what authority do they have, and under what rules are they working. That's the first thing. The second thing I'd like to say is that as we go across the life cycle, it's imperative to have clean handoffs from one function in the stage of the life cycle to the next, which kind of starts getting at Art's point. Could we take a pause, Mike, and let Art speak to his question? If
Yes.
he's still with us?
Art says he feels that one issue that needs to be addressed is when hospital administration approves funding for infrastructure project and then the project doesn't begin right away or even the current fiscal year, and then it drags on for much too long. I've seen this in other sectors I've worked in also. And I'm sure you've experienced some of that.
Absolutely. I wish we could hear the ending part of what Art was headed to, but that causes tremendous frustration. It falls under the delivery stage of the life cycle, and there absolutely has to be an integrated project team with transparent, timely communication so that everybody knows what's coming. And Art, I don't know if you face the same challenge as the federal government does, but when we have those projects, there are as many as 5 funding streams that are required to activate a newly constructed building. There's an equipment stream, the building itself, an IT stream, a furniture stream, a furnishing stream, site prep for specific equipment, and coordinating all of those in time to get it all done on time is quite a challenge. And I think people, especially the users, need to know what's coming. So it's going to take clear, transparent, honest, timely communication. I don't know if I'm answering your point, Art, because we can't hear you, but we absolutely feel that pain.
I take it from his smile that that was somewhat successful. Marty had his hand up, though, so...
Hi, Marty.
No, I really appreciate the opportunity to participate in this, and it kind of it makes me think about the infrastructure standard that are created with ASTM, and the thing that comes to mind after listening is an aspect of that standard that was removed because I needed to get it approved. And it was the idea of the 15 types of infrastructure that were included in that was there was clusters. So if you think about education, of course, you got buildings and you got healthcare and you got education and you've got water and sewage. So when you look at the clusters of infrastructure, then you start seeing that perhaps power might be the one that links all those clusters together. So I think one of the things I see as necessary is to identify a priority, because it seems like this effort is so massive that you can get bogged down, and then you get involved in 4-year cycles of the presidency. So I guess that was my contribution, is that I like to participate in this effort. But one of the things that maybe a good analogy would be is that the difference between the ASTM 31 or 3210 and ISO 55000 is that I see the ISO 55000 being kind of like the World War II strategy of invading Europe through France, and I see the E3210 being more like those gliders that went across the lines so that they could implement the takeover. So I think we need to break the problem into smaller bits in a strategic way, and I guess that's my contribution.
First of all, I really can't thank Ed enough for being like you say, the research rodent on this this template, because it was when the team of us put the template together, we had some ideas about what we were looking for, but it wasn't until we could actually see a live one that we could see where some of those ideas seemed to work okay, and other places where we needed to kind of go back and revisit them. And the one that Ed mentioned briefly was when we start talking about stakeholders, and I think. And by the way, I'm hoping that other people that are on this call will reach out and get copies of the paper in its current status and kind of add themselves to our team so that we can benefit from their wisdom too, because this is a really big, complex issue, And some of the folks on the call I know have worked through issues like this before, and I'm hoping they'll help us work through this one. But so in the area of stakeholders, what's really critical in my mind, at least, is making a distinction between the stakeholders who matter most and in what roles they matter most. So, for example, what we now have in we have a separate we have a separate question for asset owners and operators. So those are one of the key stakeholders, are asset owners and operators, and those are the people whose behaviors we're trying to change. But then when you talk about influencers, you've got influencers that, and I think we all recognize this, different kinds of influencers have more or less influence per particular sector. So for example, in the healthcare sector, I'm still I need more education from Ed about this joint commission, because it sounds like, although they issue a set of guidelines or whatever, I don't know, something that they issue that people feel like they need to comply with, but the entity itself might actually be a stakeholder. And because it sounds to me like it's an influencer. It sounds to me like what they do has terrific influence over how healthcare is delivered. And so it's the same way he mentioned that there was a fire. He said the two things we really pay attention to in healthcare is the Joint Commission guidance, and something I think from the National Fire folks. I mean, so if those are if those in fact are guidelines that have huge impact on healthcare, those need to be influencers. And within the influencers, I would kind of rank them in order of importance. So the ones that are most influential, which in some cases are going to be maybe congressional committees, are at the top of the list, and things that are influencers like media are less influential, and then their associations. And then the third category are beneficiaries, and what I think Jim likes to call other impacted parties or something like that. It's the people who are impacted by the activities of the organizations. So this is essentially what this document is. It's kind of it's laying out information that's intended to be used in a diagnostic way to say, all right, now that we know what really matters here and who has what influence, now we can chart a path forward. We can figure out who to reach out to, what we should expect from them, how we can engage the other key players in this issue to actually move the ball forward.
That is so well stated, Jack. Thank you for that. And Art?
Just to finish the point that I was trying to make with the timing of spending, I've heard from the CFO and other finance professionals that if facilities, for example, ask for funding and they don't start spending that money, I mean, the budgeting process begins for us like in, September, October. And so if the department doesn't start spending immediately in January, it kind of sends a message to the finance people, hey, is this really that important? And I've seen projects that were funded from years ago that are still waiting to happen. And so I think, and again, I've seen that in the utility industry as well. So I think that if like the finance people say, if it's that important, these people that deal with the facilities and other infrastructure need to begin these projects right away to show that they really are important.
Well, we have the honor of Peter Kohler joining us from Australia, and he has already done this type of thing. So Peter, if you would like to comment on what has been successful with what you have done in Australia in addressing some of these issues, and maybe comment now that you've seen our National Asset Leadership Strategy combined with one of our first sector strategies.
Yeah, I have been involved in health in Australia, and one of the things that I think the and I can't comment at all about the details of how things are funded and otherwise within the US. Clearly I can't. But the way I would say to start off with, a fantastic presentation by Ed. You have a lovely turn of phrase apart from anything else, Ed. And the passion in the middle of that too is really outstanding. So I was very happy to hear you talk today. So well done for that.
Thank you.
What I would say is that in relation to health, there are many, many problems in health. From bluntly, clinicians thinking they understand how to run some of this stuff, and that's one of the issues. But one of the things that I tried to do here in Australia is try and talk to the senior people in health and ask them. Ask them to get involved with and team with and benchmark with other organizations. For example, and this sounds extraordinarily way out, but one of the health regions that I was working with some years ago, I actually suggested that they should benchmark themselves against Qantas. Now, Qantas is an airline, right? And I know a lot about Qantas. But one of the reasons that's so good is that airlines are very good at delivering machines that work lots of the time. In other words, availability, on-time running is what they live on. If they lose 1% on-time running, their profitability dives dramatically. And so they pay very close attention to those sorts of statistics. But they also are very good at figuring out how to deliver kit, aircraft and all the other stuff that works well for a long time. In other words, high availability. Availability equals money. I know health is not in the middle of not making money, but health is there to deliver health care. So the more machines and systems are available, the more health care that can produce. But but the impact of that would then drives down into, well, how do I do this stuff? It's one thing to talk about that, and how do you do that? So one of the things that I would suggest here is rather than one of the things I would suggest is look a little bit outside of health to find the areas that can really help you do things and look at things differently.
That is part of the approach. So yep.
Anyway, thank you for calling me. And for me, it's a little bit early in the morning. So I wasn't expecting to be called in here, but I can talk underwater, so it's okay. Yeah.
So Australia is so far ahead of the world. It's a leader in this. So what do you think are some of the secrets to your success of having a nationally recognized asset management success?
Oh, gee, that's a large question. My goodness me, in health.
No, for the national, for the whole nation. Yeah. You've been.
I addressed some of this stuff in the talk I gave a couple of weeks ago. But true. Essentially, and it starts with I think two things. But the first one is politically. There's significant consensus between the two extremes of politics, if I can say that. And so whilst politics exists, in terms of national infrastructure strategies and plans, which I addressed a couple of weeks ago, what is really good to see is that both, in Australia, it's not Democrats and Republicans, of course, there's Labor and Liberal, but they both generally agree that they have to get together to solve these problems. And because having competing demands just means it just never happens, because certainly in Australia, and it's the same in the United States as well, where federally you might have a Liberal government, state, and that's generally the way these happen. Actually, you look at Australia, at a federal level, it might be one political flavour, and at a state level, it's another. So the Australian public tends to think, I think, that we need a balance of these things. Not just one extreme. But in other words, it forces the political people to come together, and I think that's one of the benefits Australia has, that we have a broad understanding that we have to create a consensus on this, and the consensus drives down to public forums and other things. Yeah, so to me, that's where it all starts, and then there's the how do we do this, and that's where the role of the Asset Management Council gets involved, and how do you create an OPEX plan that actually delivers the healthcare outcomes, or the aircraft that's available, and all that sort of stuff. So there's the consensus, there's the how to, and the role of the Asset Management Council, I suspect, much like the Asset Leadership Network, is to then tell people that there are ways of doing this, and you don't create a maintenance plan off the back of a fag packet, and you don't create a maintenance plan by talking to OEMs, although they're an interesting input, but you don't create a maintenance plan by just copying what the OEM says, the original equipment manufacturer, all those sorts of issues. There are a number of, we call them myths, MYTHS. There's about 12 or 14 myths that we always talk about when in relation to developing maintenance plans, OPEX plans, CAPEX plans, and those sorts of things. So off the top of my head, there's the two.
That's really good input, Peter. And the thing that I take from that is that the Asset Leadership Network is actually on the right path to achieving some of the things you just outlined. So,
yep.
Thank you for that input.
Okay.
So, Ed, I know you have a meeting at the top of the hour. Are there any few words that you'd like to say to wrap up here?
Thank you to everyone who called in for sharing your time with us. And Peter, I'm humbled by your feedback. Thank you. And Art, I want to say one last thing about the plight that you rightfully raise about the delays in construction. And this is just off the top of my head. There would be many more different reasons, but here are some of the classic reasons why what we call the obligation of the funds is delayed. The requirements are poorly developed. They were done too fast without all the stakeholders involved, and they moved into the design phase with lousy requirements. Then the client, the customer, sees this design and says, that's not what I wanted. So they go back to the architect and change the design, causing a delay and an increase in price. Everything gets delayed. The cost estimating is a big problem. If the estimates are done too early in the process, they're not going to be as solid. So depending on how you want to allocate or obligate the funds, that has a lot of control about how accurate the estimates are. If the estimates are off, we get bid busts or we get protests in the bidding, and then finally in the execution stage of delivery. Well, just how sophisticated is it? Are we using an EVM curve, an earned value management curve? Do we have the issues and risks identified? Is there CPI and SPI, a cost performance index and a schedule performance index? Are all those things being done? And all across the life cycle, in every single phase of the life cycle, there are best practices and capabilities that are defined and backed up by either laws, regulations, or best practices. Are they being followed? Because if they're not, then the problem that you described is going to happen. It's going to happen.
Well, I am very happy that the Asset Leadership Network gave the VA an award in 2016 for developing some very advanced planning tools that helped make asset information, the data about the assets, be an asset in itself. And while the VA did not continue with the efforts that we recognize, the Department of State has picked up everything that was developed in the Department of State, refining that, and I'm hoping that it will bounce back to the Department of Veterans Affairs and it could be implemented, because you capture that data in the type of BIM-storm approach, Art, that we participated in earlier this year for pandemic planning, then some of those issues are eliminated. But this is a big scope. The ALN is being quite audacious in its plans, but we have received permission from the Biden-Harris transition team to submit documents, and that the Board of Advisors will deliver them to the appropriate people. So we're on the right path. Thank you all for your hard work and participation in this, and let's keep it up, and look forward to seeing you all next week.
I just want to take a brief moment to share again our organizational member slide, just to say thank you, because these Thursdays wouldn't be possible and the event would which was such a success this fall, wouldn't be possible without the support of these organizations.